Dog. I guess we're ready. Good morning.
Good morning, Babz.
Morning. I'm Babz Ivy.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
And welcome to Criminal Justice Insider. We have a guest today, but before we get to our guest, we sort of like do a little housekeeping to say hello. The show is brought to you gratefully by the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Grant. How are you, Jeff Grant?
Good, Babz. How you doing? How's day 40 of the quarantine going for you?
Oh, is it day 40?
I don't know. I'm making that up.
I think this is what it was like to be on the Ark, I think, right? Like
hey, have you been hanging out on your front porch?
On a few days I've been on the front porch by my, a couple of people were riding their bikes by and stopped by. So, I mean, we're like everybody else. We're just trying to, manage and hang in. So,
Yeah.
So, hello to Lynn Springer.
And to Andrew Kaplan, our significant others.
Yes.
Hey, did you have Andrew on? You have Andrew on your show yesterday?
Yes, we were talking about poetry because he and I share a love for poetry. And April is National Poetry Month. So,
nice.
So yes.
Lovely.
So today we are excited to have Icy France. Am I saying it right? France,
Icy France. That's anything's fine. Anything goes.
Now she has a great bio, which you can see on all the social media sites that Jeff has sent this show to. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of highlights about her. She grew up in Fairfield County. She graduated from Trinity College in Hartford. She got her alcohol and drug counseling certificate from Marymount Manhattan College. She has worked in the field of drug and alcohol prevention and education at the Freedom Institute in Manhattan and at Greenwich Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was the assistant director of International Institute for Alcohol Education and Training, working with professionals in Russia and Poland. She's the author of Sergeant's Heaven, a children's book that she wrote about the death, after the death of her fourth child, to help children process the loss of a loved one. She had 4 children. She sat on the boards of Greenwich Country Day School, the Taft School, Arch Street Teen Center, and the Parents Board of Bucknell University, and has volunteered for liberation programs, LifeBridge, OSSO, Inspirica, and currently she writes a column for the Greenwich Sentinel and is co-founder of Connecticut Women's United, an organization created to inspire and educate women about local and state politics. She lives in Riverside, Connecticut with her husband, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a fish, and 4 children.
Read the red part. Read the red part.
Please check out her website, the icing on the cake, icyfrantz.net. And that's icyfrantz.net.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. Nice to be here.
What brings you to our shores today?
You know what? I'm sorry.
So Icy writes this column for the Greenwich Sentinel, and she goes deep on family dynamics and on her background and alcoholism and sobriety. And it's, and we were just talking about it before the show, how amazing it is that even communities like Greenwich now are embracing people's stories and authenticity and suffering and redemption, and how beautiful that is. And so maybe that's a good place to start. I see. What informed all your work? What are really the issues that kind of led you into alcoholism and then into recovery?
Okay. So if I start with the alcoholism, you know, I'm from a long family of alcoholics, although when I was growing up, it wasn't talked about. We didn't, you know, put out our weaknesses. We didn't talk about them. So I didn't really know. I didn't understand. In fact, I didn't realize that I had another family member that had been in a rehab until I showed up at Silver Hill for a meeting. And I said, I've been here before. And I had to call home and say, why have I been here before? And I realized that one of my parents had been there in a program. So, you know, I don't feel like my story is unique. I drank because it gave me something. You know, I think at first I was pretty shy, and it gave me the ability to feel more in my own skin. It gave me the ability to talk to anyone if I walked into a cocktail party. I didn't have those skills. I hadn't developed them on my own. And you know, I like to say it worked until it didn't. You know, I found myself in college. I think for a lot of people, college is a time that an addiction issue can really take off. And for me, that's where mine did. I think it's, I feel very lucky that I found recovery early, as in my early 20s. And it's been a gift. And it's certainly been something that has not defined me, but has affected my entire life. And so as I look to my column, I think what I have loved about sobriety is, and for me, I got sober in a 12-step program. That ability to be honest and truthful about our journey, about our life, about the mistakes we've made, and still be accepted was amazing, beautiful. And so I found that my column, no matter what the subject, I try to be as honest as I can. And what I have found is connection. And I think, you know, none of us like the parent who sits there and just brags about how great their children are. We like the parent who says, you know what, my child got caught, you know, punching another kid today, or, you know, just as honest, like I have a kid who's struggling, because usually we all have those things, and we connect in those places of vulnerability or uncomfortability. That's where real connection happens. And that's what I think, and I hope that's what my column is and has been able, and the gift to me through that column, I have to say, when the editor asked me to write a column, I looked at her like, what? I've never really written. I don't know what I'm going to write about. And what I've found is no matter what piece, and some of them are frivolous and some of them are serious about addiction and loss, and some of them are, you know, there are a lot of different topics. But I find connection with my readers. I'll run into someone, they're like, oh, I love that piece, or, oh, I felt that way. Oh, I connected, that resonated with me. And so those connections with people and with my community have been such a gift. And that's, you know, that's what led to the website, which is just more of that, the fact that we all need connection. And I think as we're all living individually or with our family or separate from many of our friends and the people in our lives during this pandemic, I find that everyone is finding ways to connect. I think the human spirit, we're social people. We find ways to connect. And for someone in recovery, it's really important to connect.
So did your alcoholism put you in a situation where you were incarcerated, or what is your relationship to the criminal justice world?
I was not incarcerated. And that was probably but for the grace of God. I was pulled over and given a DUI. And that, I'm trying to think, I think that's that's probably legally as deep as my bottom was. And yet I find that for all alcoholics, we all have different bottoms, right? We all have different places that our alcohol takes us. And mine found other bottoms. I found other, I found a bottom that was painful enough to make a change.
I see on the local level, you've worked in schools. On the state political level, your family's been involved seriously in state politics. Obviously, your husband Scott was a state senator for a long time. And how did this inform all that? I mean, were you, when you go to work for a school, how do you talk about your alcoholism? I mean, in the interview, do you talk about it, or do you self-disclose when you're talking to the kids, and how does that also on the state level, how does your being so forthcoming about it affect, for example, your husband's ability to run for office? Those are all kind of things in a big mix.
No, those are good questions. I have always been honest about my journey. And I wouldn't change it. Sure, there was some big bumps and I made some big mistakes. But I honestly believe that those moments of adversity, whether it's the loss of a child or the loss of a friendship, a failed marriage, whatever they are, alcoholism for me, really help create who we are. And so I don't think my husband has ever, I honestly feel like we're living, and I'm sure there is still people who cringe or feel uncomfortable when they hear or make judgment when they hear about the fact that we're a recovering alcoholic or we were in jail once. There are people, I actually feel badly for those people because I just think they're missing out. I think those labels can really make the world small and not big. And it's a very big world. So when I worked in schools, I've always been fairly honest. I don't wear it on my sleeve. I use my story when it can be helpful. I think that people that are struggling with an issue, if they talk to somebody that has struggled and maybe gotten through that same issue, they can find a lot of peace and they can find that they're not alone in whatever the problem is. And I think those things are really important.
Do you think it helped Scott be more of a progressive, more of an advocate for DMIS-related mental health, substance abuse, criminal justice issues?
You know what? I think that I think it affected the way he looked at things. Certainly as he took on the opioid epidemic and some of the laws around that. We had a lot of conversations about the fact that if we could put money up front in prevention, in education, in a lot of different programs, we would save money on the end. And I worked in prevention for a long time, and I still wrestle with prevention because I think it has to be such an all-inclusive, comprehensive program. And I also think there is a limit to what we can do in the schools, in after-school programs, in our churches, without the help of the family and without the partnership with the family. So I wouldn't say that my husband's work in Hartford was probably more, they definitely looked at he was definitely focused on the economics and budget and things that are kind of above my pay scale. But we definitely talked about the fact that I honestly feel like if you want to look at being a conservative, that if you put the money up front, you're going to save money on the other end. But we often don't look at problems that way, right? We just sort of Band-Aid them rather than kind of looking long-term.
So when you're out there, so I take it you spend some of your time speaking to people or talking to people about your experience.
I don't spend a lot of time speaking to people about my experience. It's a lot of times one-on-one. I'm a big believer because of my own experience that, so if I'm talking to somebody who might be struggling with addiction, and a lot of people get sent my way, but I also have people in my life. I honestly believe we should never shy away from letting someone know that we love them, but that their drinking or their drug use worries us, and we always own our own feelings in that. I likened it to, and I think people in recovery probably will know this story of every single time we make a comment about somebody's use and how it worries us, it sort of puts another brick into that wheelbarrow, and that becomes heavier and heavier and heavier. And I know for I didn't listen to a lot of people for a long time, but over time, that wheelbarrow just got too heavy. I don't do a lot of speaking to groups. I write more than I speak. I really write more than I speak.
So because our show is centered around people that have gone to prison, have come out of prison, who work with the prison population, have you had opportunity to sort of talk to people who may have gone to prison as a result of their own alcoholism or addiction? Or I'm just trying to see how close you are to the incarceration community.
I have spoken probably in the rooms. Jeff, I wrote a piece last year, I think, for the newsletter, but the rooms of recovery are full of people. I'm a big believer that we all get many chances, not just one chance, not two chances. We get many chances. I know for me personally, I've been given so many chances, and they can be little, they can be big. And so I have not gone into prisons to speak. And I would just say that in the rooms of recovery, they're full of a lot of people that have had a lot of consequences because of their use. And some of them, people wound up in jail or incarcerated, and sometimes not. And that's but for the grace of God, I think.
Well, I see many actually. For example, I was there the night at the Spirit of Hope Awards at Liberation Programs when you got an award there. And I volunteered at Liberation House in Stamford for about 14 months after I got home from prison. And literally every person there had a criminal justice problem because it's a diversion center. So the judges send you to Liberation House instead of to prison, and presumably if you get through that program, maybe the judge doesn't send you to prison. So your connection with these kind of organizations is it's huge, it's palpable, and the fact that, and I don't know how much time you actually spend there, or maybe you can tell us, because the list of places that you volunteer at is huge.
That list, it's not everything I'm doing today. It's things that I've done in the last handful of years. You just reminded me of a time when I was doing a social work internship at a place in Greenburgh, New York. And it was a drug and alcohol place where people were mandated by the law to go there. And so working with clients in that capacity, either that program was keeping people out of the jail. And I will tell you, this is what hit me. And again, which gave me gratitude. Some of our clients, to get to that program, would have to find child care for their children, get on one bus to another bus. It was such an effort. They had to go to such great lengths for their recovery to get to that program. And I was always so blown away by that hunger and that difficulty and those obstacles and those challenges.
So I see, if you're willing, Can you talk to us a little bit about the losing a child and what that means for mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues, and keeping a family together and keeping a marriage together, and how how did that affect you? It just feels like your willingness to talk about that, or at least put it out there, is huge.
The loss of a child, the loss of our child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the experience that we had with Sargent, our fourth son, was again one of those situations now, many years after the fact, where I can look at the ways that he introduced me to communities that I didn't know existed. So Sargent was born and we thought he was healthy and fine. And when he was 8 weeks old, he started to have what we learned were to be not epilepsy, but seizures. And we spent a lot of time trying to diagnose why those seizures were occurring. And we never got a diagnosis. But over time, we realized that it was a chronic, debilitating disease, progressive disease, probably something to do with the mitochondrial, which is a part of the cell that deals with energy. So as his body grew and he needed more energy, he couldn't kind of keep up with his needs. So that's the scientific piece. We spent a lot of time. I remember when I went from Greenwich Hospital, where they were giving me my own bed and bringing me coffee in the morning. And we went up to Yale New Haven Hospital and they said, Icy, have you ever been in a real hospital before? Not to say Greenwich Hospital isn't real, but I mean like a city hospital. And I said, no. So I went up to New Haven with him in an ambulance, and there began my introduction to. We were put into a wing, actually. Where they put crack babies, and if anyone's been around a baby that's born addicted to crack, they will know how disturbing and upsetting that can be, because when the babies are coming off the crack, they just cry and scream, and it is heartbreaking. So that was our first wing that we were put into. And as I cared for my child and realized that I was able to be there to care for him, there were babies lying in cribs all by themselves. And that was really impactful and heartbreaking. Over time, we did everything. I think when I always like to think of Sargent, my life was so clear. I absolutely knew in the morning what my job was, and that was to care for this child and to make sure my other 3 children were healthy and well and cared for too. And I was lucky. My husband and I were always on the same page when it came to the decisions we had to make, how far we were willing to go to keep this child alive. And my husband doesn't like hospitals very much. He doesn't feel comfortable in hospitals. And so he did a lot with our other children, and that seemed like the right role for him. And I did a lot in the hospital because when I wasn't there, I wanted to be there. So that we had a really nice, somehow we found this way of getting our family through our son's sickness. And that I feel very grateful, because that's not always the case, but for us, that was the case. Sargent died in our house and in our arms, and that was incredibly painful. And after being introduced to this world of sick children and chronic disease, and it was very different from the world of my very healthy children. We then were in this world of this new club of parents who have lost children, and I needed to help my children, my very young children, process the loss. Where was their brother? What did this mean? Would he still be a part of our life? What does he look like now? That's how Sargent's Heaven came about, because as a family, we sat down and we created what we decided heaven to be. So many lessons and so many miracles. I mean, we prayed all the time for a miracle for Sargent. But if when looking back, I see all the miracles that happened around Sargent, not the one we wanted, but the ones that happened around, the people around, and the people that cared for us. I mean, boy, did we feel cared for and carried during that time. And that was amazingly comforting. And I'm reminded of that every time I see anybody going through a difficult time. I also, it's a whole nother subject, but we had so many signs that he was okay. I honestly believe there's so much we don't understand about heaven, you know, what happens to people when they die. But for us and our family, I felt like Sargent was yelling in a megaphone, I am good, I am okay, I'm here. And we think about him a lot, and he's a part of our life still today in the way that's right for us. I don't believe there's one way to grieve. I don't believe there's one way to memorialize. And I feel like our family kind of muddled through the right way for us. And it's been, I think Sargent grew me up. Like any kind of tough situation, we kind of makes our world bigger. So, and I was able to, I stayed sober through it. You know, I think sometimes we think that these big things that will happen to us, I actually find it's the little things, the everyday little annoying things that build up, and we kind of dig deep when the big things come. But, you know, just a part of the road.
You know, what's hard sometimes for people in the criminal justice community, sobriety community, especially since a lot of our listenership is from marginalized communities, or at least equate criminal justice issue or even pandemic issue that we're going through now with all kinds of inner city problems. I mean, one of the reasons I invited you on today, or we invited you on today, is because class or privilege or conversation that kind of has to be put out there in order to understand all pieces of the conversation. And I've been to your home. I know where you live. Our kids went to school together. Skylar and Hanley went to school together. And it just seems to me that we're going through something now that is the great equalizer. And maybe what we get to do is we get to have more empathy and more care about everyone as a collective. For example, Babz and I both committed white collar crimes. I can tell you there's no empathy out there whatsoever, no compassion, or at least we're always battling that. And now all of a sudden I feel like people might have some more understanding of what it is to be isolated or ostracized or unable to be in society. And so, I mean, one of the things I'm hoping you'll talk about is kind of the nexus between privilege and how you get to be real in the world and how you get to reach out to a lot of different people.
Okay, I'll try. I agree. I think this time of a pandemic, we were talking earlier about the fact that one of the things I'm grappling with is the complete paradoxical feelings that I have. You know, grateful to have my children home, yet fearful, heartbroken of the stories I'm hearing. And as you were saying, you know, people that are living on top of each other in apartments or living on the streets, and heartwarming to hear some of the beauty and the creative solutions that are coming out of this time that we're in right now. And so I'm grappling with those. And I would say they're not the first time I've grappled with these sort of paradoxical feelings. Again, grateful to be living the life that I'm living and having the abilities to raise my children, stay at home and raise my children, write, volunteer, drive a carpool, drive, you know, all these things that sometimes I see in my community people complaining about, and me included, you know, and I do feel like perspective is something that is so important for all of us. And this time right now is giving us a little perspective. As far as I wrote a piece that, we've got these two communities. You look at Stanford and Greenwich, and they're right next door to each other. And where do we start and where do we stop caring for our neighborhood? Is the line right at that line between Greenwich and Stanford, or does it go beyond into Stanford? I don't have all the answers, but as I weigh my own look at my own place in the world, a couple things I know for me are true. I really enjoy people, and I really enjoy people's stories. And because of some of the things I've gone through, I feel like I've been given some perspective, some empathy for some different stories. My life, even though I grew up in privilege, was not without bumps. They might be different bumps that someone that lives in the inner city or has been to prison, but they were bumpy. They were bumps. And because of that, I feel like I've been able to embrace many stories without judgment, because I really hope people don't judge me. And so I really, really don't think it's my job to judge others. I don't think it's any of our jobs to judge. So I'm intrigued always by the human spirit and how people are able to cope with whatever they're given in life. And we're all given different things. It doesn't really answer your question. I work with this great guy. I shouldn't say work, because I don't work. We talk a lot right now. A guy named Alan Mathis. I don't know if you guys know him. He runs. He
runs LifeBridge now, but he used to be. For a long time, he ran Liberation.
Yeah, and he's taught me a lot. He now is at LifeBridge in Bridgeport, and we have a lot of conversations about the neighborhood that LifeBridge is in and how he's helping in the education. And I do a little. I don't do enough, but I do a little. And when he calls and he says, we're looking for this, or we need this, I try to rally the troops to kind of be able to help out. I wish there were bigger connections. I know that I look at education. I'm a big believer that everybody should be educated, should have the ability to be educated. And I worry about the education that we provide in the cities in particular. And I think when a child, when we're born into whatever family we're born in with a certain amount of DNA. We're born in genetically with a predisposition to some diseases or some problems, but we don't choose it. We don't. I don't have the answers, but I don't know. I guess personally, I just feel that we're all in this together. And I think that's something the pandemic is showing us. And I agree. What I've loved seeing from this time that is unsettling and troubling is that there is incredible amount of, love rising, creativity rising, people wanting to reach out and help people. And I know that in the rooms of recovery, whenever anyone's going through a hard time, what the advice that's given is to get out of yourself. Help somebody else. And I see a lot of that right now. And I hope that when things get back to normal, we can continue down that path, not the path of separation, the path of coming together. I don't know if that really answered your question.
The thing is, I don't know if I know what the right questions are right now. It's strange because I'm pretty much limited to a small space watching a TV, and I have the same influence as everyone else. And I don't know what's true or not true. I know that there's tens of millions of people out of work. I know that there's people who don't have enough money for food. But I don't, from my personal experience, it's pretty much limited to one room I'm in and a TV set and a computer. And the amount of empathy and concern I have, say, for people in prisons right now who can't get released, or for people who have other underlying issues or and are suffering, trying to find other modalities. What's going on with the opioid epidemic? What's going on with people who are having other diseases right now? Is there access to any of that stuff? And I feel personally, I feel impotent, that there's almost nothing I can do. I can't even I feel like I can barely go to the store to pick up a loaf of bread. So I'm just saying that I'm trying to count my blessings. Babz, is there anything you want to join in here? I know you've been conspicuously silent, and I just want to make sure that I'm
just allowing y'all to have the conversation, because y'all seem to be a little bit more in tune to each other's ideology around addiction, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow of that, so feel free to continue the conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely an addiction conversation in a lot of ways.
And I think it's really important because I believe that addiction is actually a disease of isolation. Mm-hmm. Alcoholism wants you to be alone. It wants you to be alone in your head, listening to your own conversation, which is, as you know, can be sort of a downer sometimes. And I think recovery is about connection. And so this time is really hard for people in recovery. And if people have access to a computer, there are online meetings for alcoholics, for addicts, and I think that those are really important, that staying connected and reaching out to people who are in recovery is important. I know for me, I Zoom with a couple of the communities I'm involved with a couple times a week, and I write, which is great. It's something I do, but it's sort of finding that program that's going to help you stay connected, because I think that connection, research shows us connection is so important for our physical well-being, but also our mental health. And so, as you were saying, you feel alone. I think a lot of us feel alone, separated. I think if, the more, and sometimes you don't want to do it. I love that, fake it till you make it, kind of do it until the feelings come. But we have to reach out to people, people that are ill, people that are alone, people that are elderly. And we need to reach out to any recovering addicts or alcoholics in our lives. And for any alcoholics or addicts out there that are in recovery, reach out. There are meetings. There are lots of ways. Also, mental health professionals are offering online services. And look, I don't think remote learning is as good as being in the classroom. I think that everybody is doing the best they can with what we've got, So there's a lot of ways to get help, to get support. And there are a lot of ways that we personally can reach out and help and support and get out of ourselves. I know the times I feel grateful too. And there are different initiatives, whether it's I have a friend that makes, 50 shields every day. There are you can get the supplies and you make them if you have access to that. And there are ways to reach out to the elderly who might be alone and sheltering in home by themselves. And those are long hours. Those are, I reach out to family members. I have family members that are alone, and I worry about all that alone time. So I think we're in a place, and I think I'm not alone. I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time, maybe some extra time that we have, thinking, how can I help somebody else? How can I be there for somebody else? And I think that is the beauty of this time. And I hope that is something that we take into whatever the new norm looks like. And that giving or that connection, I honestly feel that it's with the people in our lives, but it's in the people beyond our lives too. You know, it doesn't stop at the line between Greenwich and Stamford, the line between, you know, Fairfield and Bridgeport. You know, we need to connect and start working together as a bigger community. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, this country, I don't watch a lot of news. I find that that's not helpful. I actually listen to, I think his name is R.P. Eddy on the Nantucket Project every night. And he speaks for about 8 minutes. If you're on Instagram, he is, with Tom Scott, incredibly articulate. His background, I can't give you his whole background, but he's worked through a lot of crisis and crisis management. And so I get some of my information there. And then I listen to a lot of kind of more inspirational people, because I just find that whatever we're listening to, whatever we're reading, whatever we're watching, that's what's filling you up. So I try to do a little bit of the facts of what's happening to kind of keep me based in reality, but I do a lot of the feel good, inspiration, you know, let's stay together and get through this. And for me, I kind of need that cheerleading.
So you're launching a connection website in the midst of a pandemic. There's no doubt that the thinking behind this had to have happened before the pandemic started. So what was your motivation for starting this website? Is it an extension of the column you write for the Sentinel? Is it, and how has that shifted now in the last month or two? And do you find you have a greater calling now, or is it more topical now that we're in the midst of all of this?
You know, I started to write a couple of years ago for the Sentinel, and I didn't know where that was going to go. But what I found is that I loved it. You know, I feel like I said yes, and I wrote not knowing if I'd be able to, and I loved it. But what I loved about it was, again, the connection. I would run into someone, they'd say, "Oh my gosh, I read your piece about, and my child did that too," or "I felt that way too," or "That was so funny the way you know," whatever resonated. And I found that different people resonated with different people. And I wrote a piece on addiction where I really put it out there. It was probably the most public I had ever gone about my story. And I balanced it with some facts and some science and some other things. It wasn't just my story, but I heard from so many people. It was so reassuring in a sense, and hopefully gave permission to some people who wrote to me and said, "I've never shared my story in this community." And I've written about loss, and I've written about, you know, one year we had a really awful winter, and I wrote about a Dear John letter to winter. Anyway, it's been fun, and so the website was sort of long in coming. People were saying, "What are you going to do? You're going to write a book. Where are you going with this writing? What are you going to do next?" And I am in a writing group, and a lot of my friends in the writing group write fictional pieces, and they're writing books, and they are given these stories. You've got these stories in their head that just have to come out. And I kept thinking, I don't really have a story in my head that just needs to come out. Weekly, I have thoughts about things that we're going through that I'd like to put down on paper, which, by the way, is as helpful to me, is hopefully to anybody else, but incredibly helpful to me to process what I'm feeling. So I decided that on this blog, I hate the word blog, so I call it a site. And I started working on it a while ago. I thought I'd launch in the fall, but everything took a little bit longer than I thought, and I wanted it to feel right. I didn't want to go out there and not be ready. So I have a section of the site that's for the pieces that are published in the column. And then I have a couple other sections of the site. And one is called Now What? And Now What are the stories, we've all had them. We talked about possibly including your story at some point, where we get to that crossroads in life, and we have many of them, and you say, now what? And they can be big. You know, your children have just grown up and left the house. You've just lost a job. You've just been diagnosed with an illness. Now what? And what I find is that some people get stuck for a while, but the human spirit is incredible. I know that word pivot is being used a lot, and I kind of have come to just say, instead of pivot, we adjust, just like we're adjusting right now. We adjust with what's given to us, and then we make something and go on. And so I want to capture those moments, because I think we all have those now what moments. And then there's shine the light. And shine the light is about the people and organizations doing things that inspire. And, you know, we all watch news and we watch the horror stories. And if you watch the news every night, you would think that we live in such a cold, awful place. And maybe sometimes it is, but there are a lot of amazing stories out there too. And I want to shine the light and give a little more focus to those stories. And in the last 2 weeks, we started something called Top 10 Tuesdays. And Top 10 Tuesdays, it was actually recommended by one of my readers. She said, we need books. We want to know podcasts. We want to know shows. What are you watching? What are you doing to keep yourself entertained? What are you doing to be productive right now? And so we're offering up a list every Tuesday of those different things that you might want to put into your life to make this time more enjoyable, you know, more maybe entertain us, but also in addition to that are ways to also help and give back and be productive for others right now. So that's the website. It was launched during the pandemic. That was our launch date, and we decided to keep it. And I think a lot of us are on the computer more and more right now. So that's the way that we connect, whether it's through Zoom, whether it's through the phone, but on the internet. And so I've had a lot of back and forth. And the website, the blog, is really not a solo journey. It is, I really want people to be able to connect with it and get involved and recommend. And that's been great, because I've gotten that. It's been awesome. People have offered me some advice, which has been really helpful. I'm open to all advice because it's sort of a new endeavor. And I'm sure it's something that I'm going to learn a lot as I go. But so far it's been, it's certainly given me something to focus on during this time that feels good.
Well, thank you. We have to wind down now because we run out of time. We are at our shutdown.
I see. Tell people please tell people how to get in touch with you.
That's what I was going to say.
Sorry, Babz. Sorry.
All right, no, just give us your website one more time, and
the website is the icing on the cake. And if you go on the website, you'll find out why it's named that. But you can find it if you go to icyfrance.net. Mm-hmm. I just want to thank both of you, because I've really enjoyed being able to sit here and have this conversation with you. And I also appreciate that you're putting yourselves out there and you're there for people and you're connecting with your community right now. And I think that connection for all of us is such a gift. So thank you for having me on today. It's been really, really nice to see both of you.
Well, thank you for bringing your gifts to us this morning.
Yeah, I see. We're really, I'm happy. I've been wanting this to happen for a long time. And part of it is not just because you have an inspirational recovery story, but you've developed kind of a rabid fan base at the same time we've been doing the same thing. And it's so interesting to see who connects with the different messages that we've given and what the crossover is. And I'm hoping that we're going to find some of your fan base now, and you're going to find some of ours, and that'll be a good thing.
I want your fan base.
We want your fan base.
So thank you so much, Community Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to do this Criminal Justice Insider. And Jeff, I will see you soon.
Babz, love you. Thank you so much, Lynn Springer, Andrew Kaplan, Harry Draws. It's wonderful seeing you. Thank you,
on to my next thing.
You guys be well.
You too.
Thanks.
some important public health information regarding the coronavirus.